All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Julia, and I am one half of the 13th of the month coordinators. And I want to welcome you all to our August 13th of the month event. Make sure that you save the date for our next event, which will be in September 13th. That's going to be Wednesday. So make sure you look out for information about the topic and where that will be. So we hope we see you next month. But today we are here for resting to disrupt, exploring the rest is resistance framework. So once again, my name is Julia. I'm going to be talking about this lovely framework and book that recently came out. And I want to say happy Sunday once again. This is supposed to be a thoughtful, somewhat relaxed discussion. I really hope that some folks are ready to really think about rest as a way to disrupt and how does that actually look in our actual lives. So we can get started with the actual presentation. So we're going to actually start with a journal prompt, which I don't always do, but Michelle, my other partner in crime, usually does. So I want you all to take 3 to 4 minutes to really sit and think about what is your current relationship with rest? Do you feel worthy of rest right now? We just got out of well, we're still in the pandemic, but we are in a very particular time. The pandemic kind of brought some things up for people. So I want people to start thinking about what is their current relationship with rest, and do you feel worthy of it? And what does that actually mean for you? So take a few moments to really think about it, and then we'll start back up with some more information about the framework. Okay, I'm gonna have folks for one more minute to start to wrap up those journal prompts. Okay, so I would love to hear if there was anyone who wanted to share. What was your answer for one or two of these questions? What is your current relationship with rest, and do you feel worthy of rest now? Does anyone want to share? You can come off mute if you would like to.
I can go ahead and start.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I would say that right now, I feel like I have a much better relationship with rest, but it wasn't something that I came to easily. I feel like as a Black woman living in America, and growing up with messaging like, you have to work twice as hard as everyone else, and things aren't going to just be handed to you and you have to prove yourself. That's the kind of messaging that I was given, as a child, as a teenager. My first job, I remember my supervisor was a Black man, and I remember him pulling me to the side and telling me, you don't just do what they ask you to do, you need to figure out how to go above and beyond and do extra. So all throughout life, that's the messaging that I was given. And just feeling like, oh God, I gotta make something of myself, I have to make my ancestors proud. So it was not something that for me came easily. Like, I literally at times would be like, I need a nap, I'm tired, I'm a single mom of 2 kids, and I would have to convince myself that it was okay to take a nap.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds very much what I think what I even wrote for myself. Well, not the kid thing, but the I gotta, do so much before I can actually take the nap, right? Like that, yeah. So I think Dottie is off of mute.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, everybody. I'm Dottie. Um, my current relationship with rest is a continuing learning process of becoming more and more flexible with what it can look like, and realizing that it's a constantly changing thing, like almost everything else. I mean, my ideal of what rest would look like was in the first months of the pandemic,
Yes.
when I couldn't go anywhere, nobody had Zooms arranged yet or anything. And it was just luxury to do yoga and read and write, and haven't really had mornings like that too often since.
Yes.
So that challenge of, okay, we're back in more of the world we had before and all the demands, and especially being a caregiver for my husband who's in a nursing home where the sort of demands are unpredictable on a daily basis. So as far as feeling worthy, I totally feel worthy. I feel worthy of more rest than I'm getting, but I'm really grateful that today is Sunday, and it's definitely a day set aside because I have help on Sunday. And it's easier to devote the time for rest on a day that's already set aside.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And I think I'm glad that you brought up the pandemic. I think that, definitely I realized, like, I was like, oh, I can get more. I think I slept I had some of my best sleep, some of my best rest, like with the pandemic, because I think that I deal with a lot of like fear of missing out. So I was like, well, no one's going anywhere. So I can just like sleep. Like, as I'm not missing out on anything because like no one's outside, right? So absolutely. If you all want to like put any of your other thoughts in the chat, you certainly can. I'm gonna have us go to the next slide because we're gonna watch a video with Trisha Hersey, who was actually, oh, you know what, before we do that, why this topic? So what you all just said, Trisha Hersey actually founded the Net Ministry in 2016. If you have not followed them, if you are on social media, please go follow the Net Ministry. They have a lot of wonderful tidbits. Trisha uses performance art and social media and photography to promote the healing power of rest, particularly against blind culture, capitalism, and white supremacy. And so when I did some other kind of, research, according to the CDC, more than a third of American adults are not getting enough sleep on a regular basis. So, we're out here, we have so many things that we're doing, taking care of family members, taking care of children, working, trying to like meet up with friends, trying to have a social life. And a lot of us are actually not getting the sleep that we need in order to be functioning human beings. And then past studies have also shown that a percentage of people reporting for like short sleep duration was 11 points higher among Black people when compared to white people and other races. So obviously, racism is something that does impact our bodies, not just like how we're living in the world, but our actual mental, physical, emotional health. And that shows up in how we sleep, how we get rest. And with the pandemic, there's been a ramping up and returning to normal life. So you have people saying, come back to the office. I just saw, I think, an article last week about Zoom itself, asking their people to come back to the office, which is, hilarious. And, as we're seeing this, what does this mean for our relationship? Well, maybe a lot of us were kind of recognizing, okay, sleep is something that I need and that I value and that I actually want to like have more of. And we're kind of getting to this quote unquote normal life that we I think a lot of us have figured out like that was not actually the most healthy life for ourselves. So we're going to watch a video where Trisha kind of gets into some of the background of the net ministry and rest is resistance, and then we're going to talk about the tenants. And hopefully we'll have a nice conversation about that. So the next. All right, so I know we have to cut off. If you're able to find that video, it's a really awesome talk as she's talking more about how this is connected. Rest and collective care is tools for liberation. So please make sure you check that video. It's like, I think it was like an hour long, I think. But yeah. So I wanted us to ground that in some of her own background of why, this kind of like started for her, and her connection with her grandmother and her family. I know that I had put in the chat, I wanted to see if there was anything that people like taking notes, that resonated with you, anything that you disagree with, anything that you wanted to discuss, anything that stood out to you in this video. Anyone?
She touched on one of the things that for me I had written down in your journal prompt when she talks about the idea that rest is a birthright. And I don't feel worthy of rest. I still use rest very much as a tool to fuel activity or productivity. I'm about halfway through the book, and that's the most difficult concept for me so far, is that rest is something that we don't have to earn. So that's one of the things that struck me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, I think before we even got started, I was just talking to Dana about like how a lot of the time we hear, what is the saying, like, oh, you can't fill your cup if you can't fill anybody else's cup if your cup is not filled. I said, and what it really kind of teaches you is this, oh, you're resting, you're relaxing, you're taking care of yourself, so then you can go and do more work. So you can take care of other people, so you can do more stuff, as opposed to just like, I'm resting because I want to rest and I need to rest and I'm worthy of rest, right? Like, and that it's just a part of my body actually functioning at its best level. So I know, was there anyone else who wanted to share like what their thoughts were in this video?
Yeah, I
Anything
thought
stuck out?
that that image that she shared was so striking to me, and partly because I know her from social media, but I'm not aware of the artwork that she does and collaborates in. And that image of the Black woman resting with the cotton just took me aback, and I think I'm going to have to ponder that a minute. It was just really striking, and it made me think about how many I feel like there's so many tropes today that we do not connect, especially as white people, we do not connect to history. Anytime we talk about a Black person and they're not hustling, there's some kind of like, oh, look at that person. And I feel like that trope of laziness is always hovering. And so that picture felt just really radical to me of like, no, we're going to reclaim this. We're going to root it in history. And yeah, anyway, it felt like there was a lot to think about from that image.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, and that like Black people have like this, like, oh, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I will, I gotta hustle, I gotta get things done. And that, that continues to carry over and like I think American work culture, right? That like we gotta get this done. I traveled to Europe a few years ago, right before the pandemic. And when I was in France, it was a lady who had moved, I was American, who had moved to Amsterdam, and we were on a tour, and she was like, when she moved to Amsterdam, all the people there were like, oh, well, great, we can just all shuck the work over to her because they love work. Like, you can like just, oh yeah, like, oh girl, she'll take it. And she was like, what is going on? Like, why am I doing all this stuff? And they were like, don't y'all like this? Like, y'all love to work. And, she had to really like to really get acclimated to this. My life is not work all the time. Like, I can, take time off. Like, I can go, like spend time with friends. Like, that is there's a little bit better of a work-life balance. It's not perfect, but like work-life balance is something that is discussed. While here, everything is around work. Like, you make friends at work, you go to happy hour with work, you food with your work coworkers. I was just watching a video, someone was like, that's how you get, you can get promoted if you are going to these social events, like with people. Like, everything is surrounding that. And so therefore, where is time for rest? Where is time for family? Where is time for relaxation? And how can you fight these systems if you're constantly on the go? I'm going to ask Dana to share the slideshow again, because we are going to get into some more of Restless Resistance. I'm also glad that you're reading the book. I just got finished reading the book this past summer. These, like, in the beginning, she talked about the four tenets of the book, of the four tenets of the Nat Ministry, and as the Restless Resistance kind of framework. And so those tenets are: one, rest is a form of resistance because it pushes back and disrupts white supremacy and capitalism. Two, our bodies are a site of liberation. Three, nets provide a portal to imagine, invent, and heal. And four, our dream space has been stolen and we want it back. We will reclaim it via rest. And so I want you to sit with this for a second. We're going to actually go over these four tenets during our time together. So we can go to the next slide. And we're doing the first tenet. So rest is a form of resistance because it pushes back and disrupts white supremacy and capitalism. So as we're going through these tenets, I would love for folks to, as we're talking, to think about these things and like what's coming up for you. What is something maybe you have noticed in your own life? So for this first one, just to kind of define grind culture. Grind culture is the belief that people must work hard and be productive to prove their worth. And I think that even when we were doing the journal prompts, some people have kind of mentioned this, and with their relationship with rest. The roots of capitalism are violence and theft. So it's really important. She talks about, the collaboration between white supremacy and capitalism, and how these things push us to work in a way that is not healthy, but only, of course, just keeps the system going. She talked a lot about how capitalism gives us two options: to work at a machine level pace, essentially, which keeps us disconnected and exhausted, or we make space for rest and space for us to connect with our highest selves while fearing how we will survive. So when we do take the break, when we do, kind of say, okay, I'm gonna like go on vacation. And I know that I experience this all the time. You go on vacation and you're like, there's going to be so much work left when I get back. How am I going to answer all those emails? I hope, and like, I mean, something in the back of my mind, I'm like, you know what? They're going to notice that maybe somebody else can do this job. I need to get back to my job so I can make sure they know, like, I'm capable and I'm present, right? It's like, and so there is this fear that is underlined, even when you do take rest. So you can't even rest the way you need to, because you're frightened. Like, oh God, if I rest too much, my job can be gone. How will I feed myself? How will I take care of my family? How will I pay my bills? So it really only gives us these two options. And so it's really, I think, getting into the fact that we are all being lied to and used in these systems. In order for us to fight, we do have to rest. In order for us to resist, we have to actually be our best selves. We can't do that if we are continuing to buy into grind culture, into white supremacy and capitalism. We can't fight these things if we're not taking care of ourselves. Did anyone want to say anything about their own experience, what they think about this tenet? What are your thoughts around grind culture? I know that it's something that I'm constantly trying to unlearn. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to do this session this Sunday, because this summer I got a lot of rest and I feel very relaxed. And now the fall is coming and I'm about to start school back up and I work for a university. So that's about to happen. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to take care of myself the way I was this summer when the fall comes up? So what do you all think about tenant number 1? Anyone?
What kind of comes to me with this one thing that comes to me is how different the challenges are being retired than being, in the middle of your professional or work life. That it's a very different environment overall. But another thing that came up for me, especially kind of with what I imagine is part of the video we didn't see that gets into community care, is how important that concept is, and how I feel I would be in terrible shape if it weren't for the community care that I've been so fortunate to have, especially among some of the people on this Zoom. So I'm thinking about how that's going to enter into this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that she does talk about throughout her I think the Nat Ministry post on social media, as well as in the book, is that this actually is community work. And, it is around, like you have to start with self. And then as we all connect, as we get to our deeper, better selves, you are better able to connect with other folks and you are able to build community. And, I think that is something that's the hardest part. And like, how does community look even when you're well rested? Does it look the same? Does it feel the same? Does it have the same, even role? Like, how can we redefine a community when we're all feeling better and rested with ourselves? And anybody else have, like, what is your relationship with grind culture? Like, I know, like, a lot of us, like Dottie, you are retired. A lot of us like are pushing to get to that, like, oh, then we can do all of the things. But that's not always true either. So did anybody else have like want to talk about their relationship with grind culture or how it's impacted them?
I think the impact of electronic devices, the barriers or non-barriers that you have with work during the weekends, even while you're on vacation, you talked about, should I check email, when you're gone, because you're going to have a buildup. So I think that has not helped, and neither has the pandemic, because I think more and more people are working remotely. If you're fortunate enough to either hybrid or fully, which is what I do. And, you have to make sure you erect those barriers and that you are very clear with the people you work with about those barriers. Because I think that grind culture is becoming more and more, the expectation is, well, you have Zoom, you have email, you can easily respond, why don't you? And so how do you make sure you make those barriers very clear and stick to them?
Absolutely. She talked a lot about social media in the book. And I actually emailed her for an event and I got like a pop back email. It was like, she was taking a sabbatical from like social media and from technology. And she talks about in some other interviews how like it was really wild to her to see, like, even when they would get that message, right? Like she would tell people, I'm on a sabbatical. They'd be like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. But can you like still email me back about, could you do this project with me? And she was like, people didn't even recognize, like, if I say I'm not doing this right now, like, why are you still pushing me to do it? Like, and that like we're so like rampant with it. We're still always like in it that we don't even recognize that we're not even respecting each other's autonomy and boundary. We're going past people's boundaries. Let's go to the second tenant. We're on tenant number 2. which is our bodies are a site of liberation. The fear of what will happen if we step into the unknown is crafted by capitalism and its cult of busyness and productivity. The success that grind culture props up centers constant labor, material wealth, and overworking as a badge of honor. Liberation and oppression cannot occupy the same space. Our liberation is connected to our relationship with our bodies. Our bodies are divine, and rest is our divine right. And wherever our bodies are, we can find rest, ease, and liberation. So for the second tenet, our bodies are a site of liberation. For one, it's just a beautiful, beautiful idea and line. But one of the things that she really gets into is how if the body is a place of the focus of like constant work, it is also, if we're able to recenter, that is where we can find our resistance, right? And so, she talks a lot about how the fear of like stepping into the unknown, like what is the opposite of this busyness and productivity that I'm always in. She gets into, how grind culture props up constant labor. As someone who is, I love the work that I do, and it does end up being a badge of honor where it's like, oh, well, you're always going, you have all this stuff happening for you. You're on, doing this job, you're talking on this panel, you're in this thing. And so you end up like, oh, I'm really on it, like I'm really doing what I'm supposed to do. But the reality is that I'm not getting always the rest that I need just to like function and be with the people that I want to be with. And that includes just myself sometimes. And she talked a lot about how liberation and oppression cannot occupy the same space, which for me, I am still very much unpacking, and how difficult it is to say one thing, to say like our ideals about how we see the world, what we think the world should look like, but then like how hard it is to actually practice. And so that's something that's very difficult, I know, for myself. And then our liberation is connected to our relationship with our bodies. That is not just about who we are to other people, but who are you for you? Like, what is your relationship with your body? How does it, act when it's, actually, you're eating healthy, when you are doing what you need to do to survive, when you're sleeping. And then wherever our bodies are, we can find ease and liberation and rest. And that's something that I tried to practice this summer. So what do we all think about this tenet as well? So our bodies are a site of liberation. What is sticking out for you?
I have a thought about that, and that
Okay.
is that it's so interesting to me. This one seems in particular so opposed to a white supremacist understanding of sort of the meaning of life being around thinking. I think, therefore I am. All that everything is about the intellect, and the body is deprecated. Especially in, I think, sort of white middle class culture, the body is deprecated either as something working class people do of any race, or that particularly Black folks or people of color do. And there's so many, stereotypes and tropes around that kind of thing. So the idea of sort of rejecting that primacy of the particular left brain kind of way of approaching the world, and instead saying, no, the wisdom is in the body, I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah. That our bodies hold like, all of this information, and we're not even really able to access it because we're not treating it the way that it deserves to be treated. That we're not being, we're not doing what we need to do. We're not doing right by it. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any thoughts? And I welcome anything that you're grappling with, anything that you disagree with. I find that, this book has a lot of information that I'm still, like I said, unpacking. So any thoughts or just like, seeing the tenets, please make sure you share, because that is also a part of this work. Okay.
Oh, hear me
Go
okay?
ahead,
I'm doing
Michelle.
phone because my laptop doesn't work properly.
It happens.
One thing that's coming up for me is that when we talk about rest as resistance and like it as a way to kind of slow down like this capitalistic churn that happens that we're living in and experiencing. I think for me though, I think that because I work in nonprofit and because I work at an organization that tries to be anti-racist, and because I'm doing work that I care about, that I feel like is trying to make the world a little bit of a better place. I think a thing that I struggle with is because this work feels important to me and because it feels like work towards dismantling, if I don't do the work, then I'm letting down the other people who are also trying to do the work to dismantle. So it's this like secular thing that's happening where it's like, oh, I feel guilty because I'm not doing the work because I, people are depending on me and I don't want to let them down, but also I need a nap.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I was like pushing papers for the government, I think I would be much more like, I don't care if this work gets done.
Right.
But
Right.
I decide to do work that I think is important. I know for me personally, that is something that I struggle with.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Like some people don't like their jobs, right? Some people are doing jobs that we might find to be like, okay, well, I mean, that it pays the bills, right? But what happens when you're like, well, this is really important work to me. This is like, this is moving things forward. This is dismantling. This is helping people. This is community work. But does that still mean that you don't rest? And I think that, even in the nonprofit space, I've worked in nonprofit, like, for a while, there is like this kind of push, like if it, you almost feel shamed if you don't get it done, like this person is not going to be able to get, certain benefits, or this community is, and it's still, I think it kind of gets into that badge of honor, that overworking, the material wealth, the constant labor, like that's its own, that's its own kind of like prize. And the reality is, it's like, yeah, but we still need to rest. Like, I was telling Dana, I said before, like when you become an adult and I realized like, oh, I'm getting up to go to work from 9 to 5, that doesn't include like travel. And then like say I get home around like 6:30, 7 o'clock, right? You don't really have any other time. Like you're taking care of you. Maybe you're doing a shower, maybe you're eating, you're watching some TV, reading a book, and then you're going to sleep to do it all over again. And it's like, that's really not a fun system. That's not a good schedule. And so we need to find time to take care of ourselves, even when we're in work that we love and feel passionate about. And I'm going to go to the next tenet. I think that also talks about something that's really important, connected to us feeling passionate. Naps provide a portal to imagine, invent, and heal. So, like I said, one of the things about the book, it can be very redundant. So I'm not sure if Elizabeth feels the same way. Loved it, but I was like, I feel like you said this before. But I also was saying, I think that it's kind of like a mantra, like, it's like you're reading it over and over again so it can really penetrate and get to you. But resting our bodies is a form of reverence. Rest makes us more human and brings us back to our humanness. What stories are we holding deep inside that are untold and uncovered because we are exhausted? I really want to sit with that question because that one really kind of resonated with me when I first read it. Resting allows us to hold space for our memories, microhistories, and all the things that make us human. There is liberation in taking our time and going slow. And so the reason I think that kind of feeds into what Michelle was mentioning about when you're doing work that you're passionate about, that you love, particularly if it's helping or dismantling, there are so many ways that we could be doing this work that we haven't even thought of, that we haven't even connected to, because we're not getting the sleep and the rest that we need. And so by sleeping and resting, you have more time to imagine, invent, and heal. One of the examples that she talks about in the book is she uses Harriet Tubman as an example, which I thought was really beautiful. And she was like, in order for her to hear like what was happening in the, in the space, what was happening around her in order for her to really connect with how she was going to support, like, the Underground Railroad work. Like, she had to have time to rest. She had to connect with herself and her own gifts. And she could only do that if she rested. And I was like, oh, dang, like, yeah. Like, she wasn't just picking up and running, but there were moments that she had to sit and even listen to the call to do that work. And so, like, what stories are we holding deep inside of us? What ideas, what things that we could be doing this work differently are we holding inside of us, if we're not resting, if we could be, actually getting access to, if, we aren't taking care of ourselves, resting. And so I would love to hear people's thoughts on this, because once again, another one of my favorite tenants. But when I rest, I feel like I can conquer the world. You ever had like a good sleep? You get up and you're like, ooh, like, what was that? And then it's like, I'm gonna write that little story I was thinking of. Like, I had a really good idea. I've had those moments, but they're, few and far between, if I'm really honest, because then I start getting into like go mode again. So what are some thoughts of folks for tenant number 3? Anyone?
Yeah, this is making me think of that thing that she said in the video about enslavement and the machine-like, not qualities, impositions on Black bodies
Mm-hmm.
around that. How the quest to determine just how far can you push a body.
Yeah.
And that's making me think of this thing where she says all the things that make us human and not a machine, and free, liberated rather than enslaved, and all that. And this is deep. I
Yeah.
didn't realize the depth of the analysis here. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that we're seeing this right now. Like we just talked about the getting back to work. We are seeing an increase in people's, like, we have a lot of, what is it called? We have a lot of strikes happening right now. We have people that we're not all getting paid, but we're actually working the labor that we put in. We are, our access to things that make us healthy, that, a community is like the way it was before the pandemic, maybe. We're recognizing those things. And a lot of us are overworked. A lot of us are, like, not holding space. And I think that, what Dottie had mentioned, like during the pandemic, it was like, oh, like I remember it was like a lot of fear because it was like, well, what is happening? But then there were days where it was like, honestly, I don't have any meetings today. I'm just gonna like take a nap. Like, I'm at home, I can do this stuff, it's gonna get done. I'm gonna like take some time to relax. I'm gonna actually take a walk. I'm gonna like sit outside. I'm going to read the book that I've been putting off like for months. Like, I'm gonna actually enjoy my house. Like, right? It's like, and we spend so much time working and doing, but we don't really spend time being. And being is, I think, such an important part of just being a human being, right? Like, being is just, oh, I can just take a deep breath. I can just sit. And that's a really beautiful thing. It's very calming and helpful. But we don't really get a chance to do it. So yes, I think that, like, I have noticed how I feel after some really good sleep or a really good nap, and not having to do anything afterwards is something. And I think, as someone, I connect with my ancestors, I think, when I sleep. Like, my mom visits me when I have a really good sleep, and I wake up and I don't remember everything about the dream, but I remember like seeing her and having conversations. And I think that, that question of like, what stories are we holding deep inside of us? Like, there's so much connection to who we are, to folks who are here and folks who are no longer here, that we can get information, and we don't always, I think, do it because we're too busy. And like I said, like this summer, I was able to really, like I did some really fun stuff, but I didn't really go anywhere, and so I just kind of chilled out, and it was awesome. Look, I had wonderful dreams. I slept well. I ate well. I hung out with friends and family, and then I would be like, "Whoa, can't wait to get back to my bed." Like, and it was wonderful. And so now that things are starting to come back, I'm like, how am I going to continue to take care of myself? This is the reason why. It's like because naps and sleep, they do provide, I think, time for healing. And our bodies, a lot of our bodies need a lot of healing. So I hope that, for folks, you are kind of maybe recognizing like what when you have a good sleep, what is happening for you? How do you feel? And not just to do more work, right? But to actually get back to yourself. And we can go to the last today. If someone wants to speak, you could also feel free to
I was
come
gonna
off
add
mute.
quick,
Mhm.
Julie. One thing that's coming up for me is talking about coming back to our humanness.
Mhm.
I feel like a lie of capitalism. Like I've heard these things about, like I've heard I'm sure you all have heard about how we're, I guess at some point we're going to be moving into a time in our country and in the world where a lot of things are being automated, right? And there's like these discussions about paying people, I forget what people are calling it, like a base wage, right? That people won't necessarily have to work jobs, but like people would get a base wage to live or whatever. And and one of the things that people push back on is like, oh, if you just give people money, they're going to become so lazy and they won't do anything. And I think that like the beginning of the pandemic showed us, if you give people extra time, people were baking bread. People, I know myself, like I got plants, me and the kids got bikes. Like I just saw people doing all these amazing creative things that were feeding themselves spiritually and emotionally, that they're like, I literally never in my life just had time to even try this hobby. I didn't even know I wanted to bake bread, right? And this lie of capitalism is laziness, laziness. We don't work people to death, they're going to be lazy. And no, people are going to be creative. People are going to create things. People are going to take care of each other. People are going to protest. People are going to dismantle. As humans, there's all these other amazing things that we have within us to do with our time and our energy other than work. And literally
Mhm.
the economy in capitalism is either work or laziness, work or laziness. And that's what we're told. If you're not working, you're lazy. And that's just not true.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, like, and really good point with that is that what happens when, because I remember we did an event around like when the pandemic started, like, how is this going to impact social justice and anti-racism work. And one of the things I will never forget it. And I was like, well, no one will really be outside. So like maybe the police will leave people alone. And I remember someone else was doing BRJA, they were just like, probably not though. Like they'll find a way. And then George Floyd happened, Ahmaud Arbery happened, like, Breonna Taylor happened. But because everybody was home, a lot of people were home, right? Like we've seen a lot of protests, over a lot of things in the last few years. But people were like, well, wait a minute. So no, like, well, we see video, we see like people were actually able to focus. So then you had people not just marching where it happened, you had marches all over the world, and then people saying, well, actually this kind of stuff is happening here too. You had people who are fighting, right? And so what happens when you do have time, when you are like, well rested and maybe you're at home, like when you're not constantly working, um that and it shows you, I think, the connection between work and capitalism, and how it impedes on actual movement. Because if you're working all the time, you can't focus on someone being killed by the police, or your wages actually being stolen, or the high prices of food, or you can't focus on the things that are actually negatively impacting you, and ways to fight back, because you're not well rested. You're constantly in a mode of productivity. And so thank you so much for bringing that up. Like that is a very real thing. And also a lot of people who were baking bread, who were got into a lot of hobbies, and then they try to like make everything into like, oh, I'm going to turn this into a side hustle. And it's like, Everything does not have to be a side hustle, y'all. We can just do stuff because we enjoy doing it. I like to bake bread. I mean, I did not bake bread, so I'm just using it as an example. If I like to bake bread during the pandemic, I wanted to sell that bread at the farmer's market. Like maybe you can, but it doesn't have to be, like you can just enjoy it. And so I think people getting back to just enjoying things just to enjoy them as opposed to trying to make money off of them. We can go to the next and last tenant, which is tenant number 4. Our dream space has been stolen and we want it back. We will reclaim it via rest. So this last tenant, she talked a lot about the dream space. She says dreaming is a way we move forward towards liberation because it is a direct disturbance of our life under capitalism. So that's kind of what Michelle, we were just kind of discussing in that last tenant as well. Our motivation to move against domination and injustice begins when it directly affects us. This means our dreaming must center on the love, community, care, and unlearning what white supremacy and capitalism has done to us. Capitalism is new and our bodies are ancient, which is one of my favorite lines in the book, that this is a new structure, but that our bodies, like, we are ancient beings. Like, this is our bodies work, and they work a particular way. You got to make sure you're feeding it. You got to make sure you're resting it. You got to make sure it's active. Like, these are basic things that our body needs in order for it to be its best. And capitalism is not necessarily something that a body needs to be under to do what it needs to do. And she also quotes in the book Bell Hooks, imagination is one of our most powerful modes of resistance that oppressed and exploited folks can do and use. And so I really love the idea of the dream space, the idea that, you know, when we're well rested, when we are resting, we are able to connect, and that our imaginations are able to, you know, be at its best and highest self, because you're not always getting the constant messaging that capitalism, you know, kind of shoves down our throats. And so these things are all interconnected. All of these tenets, I think, kind of work together really well. They all bring up really important topics and things that I've seen in my own life. So what are we thinking about tenet number 4? Elizabeth, you got the floor.
I think one of the things that you just brought up about tenant number 3, about the movements that were started in the pandemic, and so many people using that time to not just heal, but also find joy and find community healing and find those spaces that are so much more than just the trauma that is our society and the traumas we've been given in different measure. But also, I think this one, that the idea that, like, movement and dreaming, rest and dreaming can be act of liberation, really puts the move to go back to normal in a new light. Like, and I think that it's one of those things that the dangers of, well, what are we actually returning to? What time, space, and who was that for? And how did that benefit? Did it benefit me at all? Like, it may have, like, and regardless of what it appeared, did it actually benefit me, like, at all? And how did it benefit each of us? And I think that it puts it in such a new light to look at it from this framework. And that, I think that it'll be duly important, especially important in the coming weeks, months, and years.
Thank you so much for lifting that up. That is absolutely right. And so, and what you just said also made me think about even the way we use the word community. Because one of the things that I know at work is like, oh, well, we want to have people get back to the office because that community is no longer here online. Like, online is different, you know, so it feels like a more community, it's more communal when we're in person. It's like, well, yes, obviously, yes, that makes sense. But thinking about it from this framework, it's like, but the work is also getting done. So, I mean, I have community outside of work that I end up abandoning, with the exception of, like, maybe to the weekend, because I'm always working, right? So, like, if I, like, I mean, I have some other community I would like to actually be in community with, other than my work community, which is great. And I'm sure everyone has, like, families and you know, people they want to get back to, but they can't, or they can't do it the way that they need to or want to, because you're constantly in this mode of work. So it looks like it's a push, like we gotta get folks back to work because they enjoying life too much. That's what it starts to sound like. Well, we got to get them back to this office because, they out here baking bread. They out here, in the streets protesting. They over here taking naps on company time. We can't have that. And it starts to sound like that sounds like a plantation. Like that starts to sound very, it's like, wait a minute, that's not what I'm signing up for. And so I think, like our way of dreaming, like it's about us. It's just the focus is on us and what we want and what we want for our community, what we want for our lives and ourselves and our families. And that's a very radical idea. And I love the idea that our imagination is a tool to be used in resisting. It's a tool to be used in fighting back. And it's a beautiful thing to think about. Like how we can continue that work. But that means that we have to be honest about what's happening in our workspaces, right? Did anybody else have anything else to share? Okay. So those are the 4 tenets of the Rest is Resistance framework. Obviously, if I didn't want to, go into every single thing, but if you read the book, you will definitely, she breaks a lot of these things down, and to, really explore. She gets a little bit more into her own story. I believe she grew up in a very religious family, so that's a lot of that is also in that book, and you can really kind of see it and sense it. But what she really, wanted to also point out is that a lot of the time with books like these, they're kind of like self-help books. And what we usually have is like, this is a list of things that you do in order to use rest as resistance. And that's not what this book is. And so, each of us have our own kind of rest journey. We have our own way of what rest looks like. So it's not going to be a one size fits all situation or setup. And so, but she does have like a longer list of like ways that people can rest, ways that we can reclaim rest. So I think that's on the next slide. So I think that some of you all have mentioned it today. So what resting can actually look like, right? So the list is actually longer than this, but I just took a few out that really kind of stood out to me. The 20-minute nap, I will be very honest, I am not really good with 20-minute naps. I go beyond the 30-minute nap. And I think if anything, it's just telling me I'm actually a lot more tired than I realized. But yeah, a 2-hour nap sounds really lovely to me. But yeah, like the 2-hour nap, the 20-minute nap, closing your eyes for 10 minutes. She talks about just kind of being still and just closing your eyes for 10 minutes. Meditating is very difficult for me because my brain is constantly moving and thinking about something. So I'm hoping maybe in the future something that I can like think about and get into and practice. I know it's not like you do it once and then you just know how to do it. It's actually something you have to practice doing. But meditating is something that she talks about resting can look like. Social media breaks. A lot of us are connected to technology. I'm talking about myself. Um, I am not really on Instagram as often, and I'm not really on Facebook as much as I used to be. But Twitter, and I'm going to call it Twitter because I refuse to call it what that man is calling it now, but is one of my favorite social media sites. And but it's a lot. Like it is a lot of information, and I find myself just going to it. And so taking a break from it, as much as I love it, even though people have been trying to break it, is a really important thing. Social media kind of keeps us like in this constant capitalist like thing. Like I remember when Instagram first came out, you were just looking at pictures of your friends and your family. And now it's like someone's selling you something every post. It's become a way of people to monetize their lives, which to me is very dark. And like you can't just be like, I'm going to a restaurant. It has to be go to this restaurant now. I'm a food influencer and I'm getting paid to tell you to go to this restaurant. Then I'm like, well, is the restaurant really good, or are you just getting paid to tell me it's good? I don't I don't know what to do. It's kind of it's scary. But that our regular kind of everyday, I like going to this store, I like trying different places, I like traveling, has become a form of monetization, like has become a form of capitalism. So you're never free from it. It's not just at your job, but your life is your job. That is creepy. Taking technology breaks, sometimes, like, not checking your email, just not being on the computer, just getting back into nature, or just like not doing anything with technology at all. Taking a meditative walk. Um, Obviously, I was telling Michelle before she left that we read this for my book club, and someone told me that they actually leave their house without their phone. And I feel like I had a real full body reaction, because I was like, what do you mean you leave without your phone? And they were like, yeah, I just kind of like leave it someplace and I just like go for a walk. I was like, but how about if something happens to you? Like, or how about you need to contact somebody? And they were like, I mean, people know where I'm like, but no, I couldn't imagine it. And they were like, well, maybe just try like leaving it in another room and then going someplace else in your house. And I was like, I can maybe try that. I've left my phone in my room before, and about 10, 15 minutes, I'm like, okay, well, that was cute. Let me go get my phone. But if anything, just highlighted my connection with technology. And I was like, that's not healthy. That's not good. But the meditative walk, getting back out. I have friends who like take walks every morning, who like hike, and it clears their mind, right? I mean, it's kind of hard for me not to think about like when Hillary Clinton was like walking in the woods and people were like making fun of her. She was probably doing a lot of unpacking in the woods. Like, what the hell just happened? I need to go unpack that. I need to go take a walk. But how many of us could actually gain insight and connection to our bodies and our minds if we are just kind of walking and living our lives. And daydreaming. Daydreaming is a form of resistance. And this one I love the most because I love daydreaming. I daydream all the time. And I know that when you're in school, when you're younger, it's really looked down upon. It's like, she's not focused, she's not present. But daydreaming is like, I had whole stories in my head about, things that I probably should have written down. I had like ideas when I was daydreaming, things that I didn't really like always recognize or see normally when I was daydreaming. She also mentioned in the book about like sometimes she would catch the bus and she would just stare like outside of the window and just like look at like life, and how like restoring that was for her. And I was like, that sounds really beautiful. So I wanted to ask you all, is there anything on this list or something that you can think of that's not on this list, about what resting could look like for you, right? Like, is there anything that's sticking out for you that you could possibly do? Maybe you are somebody who takes walks without your phone. That is not, I'm not there yet. But, you know, maybe it is social media or technology breaks. Maybe it's closing your eyes for 10 minutes. What are some things that people think that they can, that they are possibly doing right now for resting? Anyone?
It's like walking, but I have a dog, so when we go on walks, that's like I take the phone, but I don't use it. I don't talk to anybody. It's just me and the dog, and we have playtime, and it's a good time not to talk to anybody else and just spend time with a very cute puppy.
That sounds lovely. Yes, my friend who goes on a lot of walks, she's like, she realizes that like her having a dog is really important for her life because it gets her outside in a way that maybe if she didn't have one. And I was like, maybe I should get a dog. And I was like, girl, let's stop. I'm like, that's not you. I'm sorry. I was like, just get that out your head right now. Maybe later. But yes, having a cute puppy does help. And I love cats. And I always like watch little dodo videos of people who have cats they take walks on. And my sister also is a cat lover, and she tried to get a harness for her cat once, and her cat sat down and was like, "Girl, I don't know who you think this is. Stop watching the videos. We are not doing that." So, if you have an animal that you can walk and walk with, that is awesome and definitely can help, I think, with your resting. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have to tell y'all that my neighbor has a dog that he walks on the leash and a cat that comes with them. But the
They
cat is
exist.
not on a leash. The cat just comes with them on the walk. It's amazing. It's really funny. Yeah. But I was going to say, for me, I think the resting my mind is much harder than resting my body. And I noticed that many of these relate to also resting your mind. And I noticed that I may say I'm going to take a social media or technology break, but then I'll notice like, oh, I want to check it now. My brain's like really greedy for that kind of stimulation. And when that happens, I don't get all that creative time. I don't get all the thoughtful time. I don't. So it's kind of insidious. And that I like that her focus is so much on that as well. Not just rest your body, but your whole being needs to rest.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, like, and as someone who is very cerebral, which I am coming to terms with in my 30s, I'm like, oh, like, I need to rest this. Like, the sleeping thing, actually, I'm good with. It's the brain that I'm not always resting. And so, and the thing is that, and then when I love to read, I end up reading like these really intense things, and I'm like, oh, good Lord, like maybe I shouldn't have read this abolition novel. Like maybe, a meet cute might have been really good, a good idea. But I'm always like wanting knowledge. I always want information. And like, and that's a beautiful thing. And then sometimes like I think in order for it to work as its best self, I have to find ways to take a break. And so that's something, I mean, it's very difficult when you are in school, but definitely. Dottie.
One thing that's not on here that took me a long time for it to come to me, but I realized that some of the best rest I've taken in recent years has been doing art projects, which I've never been into like doing art at all, but especially doing mosaics, which is just, it's so meditative and focused and getting rid of that mind stuff. It's very, very effective at. And it's interesting to me, as deeply as I know that, it didn't come to me for quite a while.
Yeah. I'm gonna add that to my list. I'm looking for things to do like after I graduate. And I'm like, I need to do something like, but yeah, like art has definitely been something. And I think once again that brain shows up for me because I'll be like, but I have to get it right. Like I want it to be perfect. And it's like, oh, that's also because to white supremacy. It's like, and then I go down a spiral. Oh,
that's why I love the mosaics, because you could just make anything. It doesn't have to look like anything.
Very true. Yeah, that's a really beautiful idea. I have written that down, mosaic. So I'm gonna try it and I'm gonna follow up with you. I think, yeah, like that's a beautiful way of kind of like resting your brain and kind of getting out of that and then being able to be like, ooh, that was lovely. I'm gonna go take a nap. One of the people who was in my book, they said they watercolor. Watercoloring was really nice for her, very relaxing. Um, and like that was helpful for her. Elizabeth, I see you're off mute.
I use like a narrative technique when I'm doing things that tend to be a little bit harder to rest my mind during. And I like looking at it now, for me, that's a form of resting in that moment. A lot of people use things like washing, like taking a shower, washing the dishes. And I just couldn't, my brain would be, they turn it into a little like fictitious argument simulator and I'd have a hard time. But now I tend to narrate the experience as if I was teaching someone how to wash the dishes or teaching someone how to wash their hair. And it helps me like ground myself to the experience of it in the moment. And I found that that's really helpful to stay, because if you sit there and your next step is like, well, then we're brushing our teeth and then we look in the mirror and talk about all the ways our mirror image is faulty. It's like, that's, you wouldn't say that to somebody. So you stop yourself saying that to you. So I think I use that.
wow.
So I use sort of like this narrative technique, and I use it in many things. I use it when I'm taking a walk. I use it when I use it in a lot of situations. If I wake up in the middle of the night, I tend to use it. And now looking at, I think her framework allowed me to start seeing that as more as something I'm using to care for myself and something I'm using to get to the space where I can rest.
That's beautiful. Wow. I never would have thought of that. That's really nice. I need to think about that. Yeah, like that is, so you were just kind of like, oh, now I'm washing dishes. And like you're just kind of narrating it, like, huh. I can see how that could, what that sounds like, what is it, like asthma almost, like those kind of YouTube videos where you see people like brushing hair or like getting a massage. It's very relaxing. And I'm like, I watch a lot of those videos. Like it's very like, I don't know. But yeah, that sounds very similar. Okay. I like it. Yeah, so I mean, I think that, there's so many ways that rest or getting to rest or resting our brains and our bodies can look. And it's really important for us to figure out what that looks like for us. And so maybe it is doing mosaics or doing a narrative, of stuff that you're doing every day. And maybe it's taking a break from social media. But whatever it is, finding a way that you can connect to your body so then you can better connect, I think, with the world around you and to people in your community. And just not to do more work. Like, I really want to make sure, like, it's more, she always says it's more than naps, but also that it's not just for us to do more work, but that, like, the resting is the work. The resting is, us pushing. The rest is resisting, right? So we can go to our next slide. We're about to start to wrap up. So, we kind of talked about this already. Which tenant resonated with you the most? We have 4 of them. And how do you plan to implement more rest in your everyday life? We kind of talked about that already. But if there's anything else that people, kind of like think about the tenants or think about with the how they're going to implement this in their lives, this is obviously not a whole book, but it is something that I think, people can really start to think about and really unpack. Well, how do they want to implement these things? So, anybody want to share before where did it go? Oh, there it is. Anybody want to share before we start to wrap up, before we jump off our meeting today? Thoughts, feelings? Okay, all right. Well, we are at 12:23. I want to thank you all for spending time with me talking about these tenants. I would hope to one day do a follow-up to kind of really kind of dig in a little bit deeper with this work and how this can apply to continuing to fight social justice, and white supremacy, oppression, but also like, how do we get back to ourselves? A lot of the time, I've been doing anti-racism work for a very long time at this point. And one of my mentors who has since passed, one of our BRJA folks, Avis, she always, like, I will never forget, and still, I always go back to the conversation. When I first got into BRJA, she was like, you're really passionate. This is really awesome. We love it. How are you taking care of yourself? Like, what are you going to do? And I always tell people who get into this work, I was like, this is my life. Like, this is serious. I'm like, no, I'm always gonna be like 10 toes down on this. And she just kind of like looked, and she was like, she said, but what happens when you get tired? Like, what's gonna happen? You got to take care of yourself. She's like, I've taken steps back. And I was like, like, what? Now that I am in my late 30s, I understand that so much, where this work is so important. The work that we do is important. Fighting oppression is important. Talking about racism and dismantling is so important. But it is not all of us. There has to be, time for joy. There has to be time for, grieving. There has to be time for rest. And, we have to figure out how to do all those. We can't solve everything, but, we can take the time for ourselves and our community, to take care of ourselves, and to connect with ourselves while also fighting. That's also doing the work. So I really wanted to make sure that resonated with people, that really connected with people, that, we all have moments of, well, I feel like I should be doing this. Okay. And you can also like rest. You can also take a deep breath, walk your dog, do a mosaic, wash dishes and talk, meditate. And you deserve that. And it's your divine right, because we're human beings. And that's at the center of a lot of this. So I want to thank you all for spending this lovely Sunday with me. We have our next event. We hope to see you on September 13th. Not really sure of the exact topic just yet. I think that Michelle is kind of finishing up some of that, but we hope to see you there. Hopefully well rested, hopefully doing some relaxation techniques. So we hope to see you for our September events. And also, I'm not sure if you all saw the little mini movie that Dana and those have put together. Our tech whiz, once again, Dana, thank you. And if you want to follow us on social media, obviously, if you're not on a break, if you're not on social media break, but this video and other past 13th events that we've had will be on our YouTube channel. So please make sure you look us up and subscribe. We're also on Facebook, so you can look up updates for 13th events and other BRJA news. You can also follow us on Twitter. That's what it is. And Instagram. I'm sorry, I don't like that man. And Instagram at Be More Anti-Racist. So we'll do we sometimes have live events and discussions, as well as announcements for 13th events and other trainings that we may offer. If you want to, I think the next slide is, if you want to become a monthly sustainer to support this work, you are certainly able to do that. You can use your phone to use this QR code, and you're the photo section, or you can go to bemoreantiracist.org/donate, and you can donate via PayPal. You can do a monthly donation, or you can do a one-time donation for this work. So no, Dana, we are not taking that bird off. So I want to thank you all once again. Here's the one-time donation information. It's very similar to the monthly. So in order to kind of continue this work. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you all use this Sunday to relax and get some sleep. And don't let the Sunday scaries get to you the way they get to me. But to use this time to relax. And I hope to see you all on the well-rested side. Thank you.